Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we are doing my August reading wrap up. I think this is going to be one of the quieter reading months that I have had here on this channel. We only read 21 books. Now, I know, if you are new here and you have not seen any of my other videos before, I am an absolutely feral reader. I read books very quickly and I on average read like 25 to 30 plus books a month. So 21 is a lower number for me, but I am very well aware of how insane that is. So yes, 21 is still a large number of books to read in a month, but typically I've read more. I ran out of matcha today, so we're drinking coffee, but we are going to run through all 21 books that I read this month and I'm going to give you my thoughts and reviews basically on them. I feel like you'll know the drill by now on how the wrap-ups go, but if you are new here and you haven't seen any of my videos before, like I mentioned, then make sure you subscribe if you like reading content and vlogs, especially if you like fantasy and romantasy, because that is my bread and butter. That is my favorite. So let's run through all the books that I read in August. I started the Defy the Night trilogy. So I read books 1 and book 2, and I think both were around a 3.75 star for me. This is a YA series and it is a Robin Hood reimagining. So we have our main female character Tessa, and she basically lives in the poor part of this world. There is definitely a huge stark contrast between the rich and the poor in this world, the kingdom that they live in. And there is also this disease, and the whole point of the plot is that Tessa, our main female character, tries to basically steals this medicine from the rich to give to the poor. She believes the only way that she can help save the people of this kingdom is by going after the king and the prince, who are like her sworn enemies, but something happens and she ends up having to work alongside them. There's only 3 books in this series, so I only have 1 book to go. I was hoping to... Cooper's sat on my lap because I'm sat on the floor today, but I was hoping to have finished book 3, but I just didn't end up getting around to it, so I'd like to finish it in September because we've only got that one last book to do. I really loved the first half of book 1. The second half sort of fell a little bit flat for me and I couldn't really pinpoint exactly why. And then the second book, I did enjoy it. It took a different direction than where I thought it was probably gonna go, but there was a lot happening and the ending was really good. The ending, I was like, oh, okay, now a lot has happened. Some parts I think were predictable, other parts were really exciting and caught me by surprise. So I do think it is like a bit of a slower, cozier fantasy vibe. I think that has to do with the fact that it is YA. There is a little romance subplot, but it's not like the main part of the story. There's a few different characters and we get dual and multi-character chapter point of views in these. So far, the series for me is 3.75 stars, and I would recommend it. Then we actually have my most recent read, which was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. It's my first V.E. Schwab book. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's very well written, very beautifully written, but again, like 5 stars for me is a feeling, and I just didn't get that 5-star feeling with it, but I thought it was really fun. I would recommend it. It's very short, very fast paced. I know that there's a second book in the series, and when I finished it, to be fair, I feel like it wrapped up the plot of the story. I feel like it could have just wrapped up in book 1, so I am interested to see where the direction of book 2 goes, because from what I've looked up on Goodreads for what book 2 is about, we have like a new character being added in, so I don't really know how I feel about that. That's sort of putting me off going and picking up book 2, but I did very much enjoy this. It's about a superhero and a supervillain. They were best friends in college like 10 years ago when they discovered their powers. Things happen. They're on sort of 2 different missions themselves that end up coming back together and crossing over, and it's very interesting. The lines are very blurred. The superheroes are bad, but the supervillains are good, but everyone in this is evil, but everyone's also not. There's like a lot on morality and ethics in this, but I think it was a very fun, quick, fast read. A very good introduction to V.E. Schwab's writing, so I'm probably gonna go and pick up A Dark Shade of Magic next, and maybe finish the second book in this. Red Rising. This is a sci-fi book. I describe this as Hunger Games meets Lord of the Flies but in space. You have a dystopian uprising rebellion. You have games and trials. You have politics. You're kind of like thrown into a fight to the death sort of situation. But the whole premise of this book is there are the Reds and they are working to try and make Mars habitable struggle because everyone had to evacuate from Earth. So there's like a class system and tiers of different kinds of people, and the golds are the elite. So the golds tell the reds what to do, and the reds live in very poor conditions. It's very terrible. Very unequal society. And our main character, Darrow, something happens. So there's this underground rebellion. Darrow ends up getting swept into it and finds out that not everything is what it seems, and the golds are lying to them. So he goes under this mission to infiltrate the golds by turning himself into one of them and trying to work his way up the ranks so that he can get justice. And to do that, he ends up trying to enroll into like this elite gold academy. It's like this secret society type of thing. So there's so many elements. Like, it's not what I thought it was going into this. Like, everyone says it only gets better as it goes. So this was 4 stars for me, and I have already ordered and got the second book, so I'm hoping to pick that up very soon. I read The Kingdom of Lies. I've spoken about I Caught This Cruel and Lovely quite a lot because it was in one of my 24-hour readathons, and I loved this book. I didn't expect to love this book as much as I did. It was a 4.5 star read for me, and I immediately had to go and pick up the other books. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was giving ACOTAR meets Throne of Glass, like adult romantasy with Fey, with a group of characters on a journey with this kingdom and this, you know, rebellion, and the Fey used to exist in this land, and there's magic. And I just thought it was a fun read. A read that you could really easily like lose yourself in. Some good escapism. If you like Fey fantasy books, I think this is a really good one. But book 1 was 4.5 stars, book 2 was 4 stars, and then book 3 and 4 were sort of 3 stars. For me, I feel like book 1 was definitely my favorite. I really enjoyed book 2. Book 3, it started to drag a little bit, and then book 4, I feel like we rushed some parts of book 4, but also like really dragged out some other parts of it. I really wanted a bit more of other things than what we had. Everything wrapped up in the end, and I was happy with like the overall conclusion, but the specific like characters and subplots and side narratives that we sort of went off on in books 2 and 3 sort of lost me a little bit. I was like, oh, can we just get back to the main plot and what's happening, because it started to feel like it was doing a bit too much. And there was also like a couple minor things, just like editing in chapters, where I was like, hang on, like in book 4 I think especially, there was like a specific scene mentioned where these characters were talking about something that had happened between them, but we didn't actually get the chapters of that. So I don't know if we had a chapter of that and it was cut out in editing, but then they didn't pick up on the fact that it had been referred to, or if it was supposed to be something that happened like off page. Just like little things like that where I was like, just like little nitpicky things. But I would say it's a 4-star series overall. Like, I personally really enjoyed it. I really loved our main characters and the group of found family and the plot twists that happen, especially at the start. So I read Foxglove by Adeline Grace. This is the second book in the Belladonna series. I loved Belladonna. It was a really fun read for me. I love a gothic fantasy. I love the element of death and that character and the Reaper and the atmosphere and the vibes and the magic. It's very, I don't know, there's something about gothic fantasy that I just am obsessed with. It gives such good autumnal, you know, spooky season vibes. If you're looking for like cozier fantasy vibes, gothic fantasies are my favorite, because some cozy fantasies are just a bit too boring for me, but like a gothic fantasy gives me that full atmosphere, but it's usually more fun and fast paced and a bit more interesting. I was intrigued to see how we progressed from book 1 into this, and I spoke about my thoughts a lot in my 24-hour readathon, so if you haven't seen that, I'll leave, as I usually do, all the reading vlogs I did last month where I read these books in them. I don't know what the point of Foxglove was going to be, like who we're going to focus off, and I feel like it did towards the end, it sort of mapped it out to be like a bridging book for what is, I assume, is going to be happening in book 3 and like the main characters in book 3. I feel like we had our 2 main characters, Signa and Death, and then in book 2 we have Blythe and Signa and Death, and then Fate, a new character of Fate. And I feel like book 3 we're going to move a bit more towards Blythe's storyline, and it's sort of progressing in that way, which I think is like a perfect way to conclude the trilogy. So there were some parts of this that I feel like the big ending plot twist of like what's gonna happen, how's it gonna end, I do guess that, but the actual like murder mystery element in these books I don't ever guess. I never get right. I can never pick who the murderer is. And in book 1 and 2 there are a murder mystery that's like one of the main parts of the plot is like someone is murdered and they're trying to figure out who it is in this very atmospheric setting, which is why I love it. But yeah, I feel like I preferred book 1, so book 2 was a 3.75 for me. But I definitely want to pick up Wisteria, and I really do enjoy this read. And I love the covers. They're just so pretty, these like paperbacks. I always get asked where I get my editions of books for. I live in the UK, so I have all of the UK editions for everything. But this one in particular, everyone on TikTok and Instagram always asks me where I've gotten this edition from specifically. And I'm sorry to say, this is my ARC edition from the publishers that I was sent back in June. This one you cannot buy, but it is When the Moon Hatched. This was our book club book of the month. If you don't know, I host a book club over on the Fable app. It's free to join, anyone can join. A link to it is down below so you can directly see and join my book club. I did do a reading vlog for this. Every month I do a reading vlog for book club, so book club has already got access to this. If you are in my book club, I did post the link to the reading vlog in the club lobby, so you can find it there as a post. But if you haven't seen my When the Moon Hatched reading vlog and you want to watch it and you're in book club or you're going to join book club, a link to it is shared in the club lobby. Book club already know I rated this 3 stars. I feel like I had higher expectations going into it because it was so hyped up and so loved. I'm also like a big dragon lover. I love dragon books. This has been on my want to read list for ages, and I gave it a 3 stars overall, and I think 2 out of 5 on the dragon scale. The author's writing is very beautiful. It's very poetic. She has a very distinct style of writing, and I also feel like the way she writes her books is probably going to be like, we have a lot of questions and a lot of things come up, but we won't get answers until like the very end of the book series. I know the second book has been announced, but I don't know if it's just going to be 2 or if there's going to be more. I don't expect to get answers anytime soon, and I had so many questions. The main issue I had with this book was we had 138 pages of the most intense world building that I have ever experienced, and then after that point it just sort of felt like, what was the point of that? Because it turned from epic fantasy with a romance in it vibes to just straight romantasy. I was like, oh, like we're having just like a dragon romantasy story. Why do we need all this background of mention of politics and these gods and the universe and the way the things work? This almost like a second language to learn with this really intense glossary and all this info dumping if it's not going to be referred to a lot in the rest of the book. So after I got my head wrapped around the world and how everything works and the magic system and the map, I was like, oh, that seems like it was a bit pointless. Maybe we'll come back to it in book 2, but I wanted more of that. I wanted more politics. I wanted to get more invested in the world because I had spent so much time trying to understand it. Also, there were parts of this book where I was like, this is a random addition into the plot, and it didn't feel like it was adding into a character development or like the overall narrative, and I felt like they could have been cut out. It was just like confusing. As a reader sitting and reading this, I didn't feel like we were going from point A to point B with like a clear direction of where this story is going. I felt like, oh, this thing has happened. Oh, and we're gonna jump to this thing. Oh, and now we're gonna jump to this thing. And we're just like zigzagging all over the place, just waiting for things to feel like they make a bit of sense. Will I read book 2? Probably, just because I have a lot of questions and I would like some answers, but not gonna rush to pick it up. I read the Fey Spy Academy series. Book 1 is Avalon Tower, and this was a 4-star read for me. And book 2 was Veil of Dreams. This was a 3.75, I think. But I would say it's a 4-star series overall so far. There is going to be one third and final book coming out, so it will be a trilogy. It's just like a silly Fey fantasy romance story. Book 1 was definitely more action-packed. We had a whole cast of characters. Our main female character is American, and she goes to France for her birthday. She ends up running into her ex-situationship. They hate each other. They did not end on good terms, and she gets wrapped up in this spy mission of these demi-fae and fae helping save fae, because in this world with humans there was this fae war, and this fae king basically has this magical veil up. It is set in like our modern day world, mainly in between like France and England. They're the two main areas where the plot is set. but it's like in the future after this Fey war, so there's like no technology because that was destroyed in the war, but there's human and Fey. And yeah, there's this evil Fey king and this magical sort of veil, and our main female character, like I said, gets swept up in this, and they're like, well, you're gonna come with us now to MI13 because you've gotten yourself involved in this spy mission, and turns out you have secret powers and we're gonna teach you how to train them. So that's basically the premise for plot, like book one. But not all is as it seems, and we have like a mentor and mentee ex-situationship, complicated relationship to deal with. Something happens at the end of book one. It's a very big plot twist cliffhanger. So when you're going into book two, you're like, where is this gonna go? Story completely changed. This romance story and like the direction that this went in was way more interesting than like the romance we got in book one. I would have loved to have more of this hinted at or building up in book one, and I feel like we could have had that. I do feel like book two was just mainly romance. It was a lot of court politics, and we didn't get like that whole cast of characters, the action and the drama that we had in book one. I'm not gonna go out and get a tattoo for this book series, you know, like it's not gonna be that like life-altering book series, but is it a fun Fey story? Yes. I read The Stars Are Dying. I was sent an ARC copy of this. Some parts was quite choppy and we jumped from scene to scene and time was sort of jumping around a little bit. I had to reread quite a lot of pages and chapters because I felt like I was missing important like plot points or things that had happened, but they hadn't. Like just the structure and the way that the book was written itself, I did find it a bit challenging to wrap my head around. The overall vibe I really enjoyed because it was giving Blood and Ash meets The Serpent and the Wings of Night, like a dark Fey vampire story. I do feel like there was some parts of this plot that I just did not understand. Like we had elements of trials in this and they confused me still to this day. I don't really see what the point of the trials were in this book. I don't know, I just feel like there was maybe too many things happening in this that my brain was struggling to fully understand and follow along. But if we had stripped it back a bit, I maybe would have enjoyed it more. It was a 2.5 for me. I do want to read the next book to see like how it progresses and if things start to make a bit more sense. I really do like the premise of the plot and like the idea behind it. The execution for me was just a bit too difficult and choppy for me to fully follow. So that's how I feel about that one. Throne of the Fallen. I really enjoyed Kingdom of the Wicked, but I love this way more. I definitely think that this series is going to be so fun. I think it's an interconnected standalone series and we will eventually have all of the Princes of Sin. You don't have to read Kingdom of the Wicked. Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy is set in this world. There's these Princes of Sin. It follows one of the main princes. So this is like set in the same universe, the same world. We have crossovers with characters from book one, but it's like a spin-off. You don't have to read Kingdom of the Wicked to read this though. It's very fun if you have because you already know the world and the characters and sort of how things work, but you definitely don't have to. It's very much romantic. It's very much romance set in a fun fantasy world. So I feel like if you're a contemporary romance girly who's trying to get into more fantasy or looking for, you know, fantasy romancy book recs, this is such a fun one. It is adult and it is spicy, but 4.25, and I cannot wait for the next book to come out because it's coming out very soon. And then for Kindle reads, because I read quite a few books on Kindle, I read the final book in the Darkmoor Penitentiary series, which is a spin-off for Zodiac Academy. Darkmoor Penitentiary and the Ruthless Boys prequel series are both reverse harem. I just don't think reverse harem is for me. I just don't think I'm a reverse harem girly. I like one main female character to end up with one male at the end, not all four. But Darkmoor Penitentiary, the third book had such a big cliffhanger and I feel like the plot had so much potential. But for me personally, it just felt like the authors maybe just wanted to wrap up the series and be done with it. Book 4 just felt really flat for me. I felt like we were just conveniently wrapping things up and tying things together for the sake of ending the book rather than for, you know, the plot. So some parts of book 4 just felt very silly to me. So it was quite disappointing for me. I read A Deal with the Elf King, which is the first book in a fantasy interconnected standalone series called Married to Magic. They all, I think, are gonna follow a very similar formula. It was giving a similar formula to like contemporary romance books where, you know, you have your characters they meet, and then in this there's like a arranged marriage or marriage of convenience, and you know, characters don't like each other and they're gonna end up falling in love, but that we have this conflict towards the end and this resolution, and romance book, you know, but set in a fantasy world with fantasy characters. So again, I feel like this is a good book series for people wanting like palette cleansers in between their big fantasy books, or if you're a contemporary romance girly wanting some like fun, full fantasy books. If you want standalone fantasy books where you don't have to read like a whole series, if you just want like a light-hearted romantasy, I would definitely recommend this. It was 4 stars for me. I very much enjoyed it, and I will be working my way through the interconnected standalone series as like palette cleansers in between books, but I'm gonna space them out because I feel like they could become quite samey, because that's why I don't read a lot of romance books back to back, because they all feel sort of similar when they follow that like typical contemporary romance formula, if you know what I mean. But I very much enjoyed. I read The Hunted Heir by Holly Renee. I'm gonna just say absolutely not. This was a no for me. This book was the definition of this could have been an email. Why is the second book in a fantasy series 200 pages long? It wasn't even a novella. It was an actual book and it was 200 pages long. I just think there was no purpose for it, no point. I think this story could have had so much more potential if it was just put into one book, because the main issue I had with book 1 was that it was so short and we didn't have enough time to let like the story develop. It was cut quite short, and I thought maybe book 2 might have felt like the other half of book 1, like what was missing from book 1, but it just felt like a couple chapters. It didn't feel like nothing really happened. It felt very predictable. It felt like we sort of rushed through a lot of things again because it was so short. I just don't think a fantasy book can be 200 pages long. It's a no from me. I finished the Bargainer series, so I read the first book at the start of the year, and that was when I was starting to get into like darker romantasy reads. Now that I've read a lot, I was like, okay, I feel like I can go back and finish this series, because at the time I was a bit like, whoa, I don't know if this is for me. I will say I really love Laura Thalassa's writing. There's something about it that's very addictive for me. I feel like I can sit and read her books and just like zone in and binge them. Yeah, something about them, I just like don't want to tear my eyes away from the page. But the story itself, like it wasn't my favorite story ever. I definitely loved the novella more than the books itself, which is surprising because I'm not a novella girly, but I loved getting the novella in between book 2 and book 3 that gave us Des's point of view, because I would have loved to see more of that in the books itself. It just made me like him more as a character and believe in their romance a bit more. I'd say the series is a 3-star series for me. I enjoyed it. It's not like my number 1 favorite, but I would also recommend it if you like darker romantasy books. But I will say, like, check trigger warnings, because this is quite a dark story and there are some intense themes and topics in this book. So it's definitely not for everyone. And then finally, I read A City of Flames, which is the first book in a series about dragons. In this world, our main female character, her father was killed by dragons, and there are these people who are trained to capture and kill dragons, because dragons are bad, dragons are evil, and our main female character has been, you know, lived her whole life wanting to train to capture and kill these dragons and follow in her father's footsteps and avenge his death, basically. But the dragons in this world, there's like 3 kinds of dragons and dragon magic, and there's also dragon shifters. So you have like actual dragons and dragon shifters, and then different types of dragons and shifters possess a different type of dragon magic. So I thought that part was really interesting. I felt like the first half of the book was a bit rushed, and again, like jumping from time to time. Right at the start of the book, there was this scene where it's like, okay, she's gonna get on a horse with one of these main characters. We got the one horse trope, and I was like, okay, maybe they're gonna get to know each other and bond a little bit. Maybe we're gonna have this journey of them on horseback getting from one place to the other. But no, it was like, okay, they get on a horse, and then the next line is, okay, now they're at an inn. So I'm like, okay, no horse scene. Now they're at an inn, what happens next? Nope, they're at their destination. I feel like that could have been like part of the plot, or we could have just been like, I don't even know. But I was like, oh, it's literally going like, okay, now this is happening, now this is happening, now this is happening, now they're there. And I was like, can we slow it down a little bit? It just felt a bit rushed for some parts. And I feel like we were forced onto a specific relationship dynamic at the very start to try and maybe create like a love triangle or tension for later on in the book, but it just didn't hit because I just didn't believe in the romance that built up at the start because it just happened so quick and so forcefully. But I did love the love triangle, the later tension, like that storyline. I thought that was fun. That was like the good romantic part. We have two enemies and two people who hate each other and each other's kinds, and they have to make an unlikely alliance because they have different end goals but like the similar mission that they need to go on, so they end up working together. There's like a bonded animal, different creatures in this. I thought it was really fun, so it was 3.5 stars. I think, you know, there was some flaws in the book. I didn't think it was like a perfect book, but I think it's a fun story, and I'm going to read on to see what happens with the story because I think it has a lot of promise. And this was a 3 out of 5 on the dragon scale, so that was very fun for me. And they are all the 21 books that I read in the month of August. I don't know how many we're going to read in September, hopefully more, but it's my birthday this month. I do want to go book shopping and pick up some new books, so hopefully we have some more time to get some more reading in. So I'm so excited to see what we read next, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.